Let's talk about the different types of activities in a private equity fund. Usually, there are three different phases: sourcing investments, actually making deals, and monitoring those investments. And we're going to take a look at those three phases in more detail. Let's cover it. Private equity firms are deal machines. Especially for leveraged buyout funds, their MO is to go into a company, ruthlessly optimize it for 4 to 5 years, and then leave with a profit. That's it. Get in, get it done, get out. But naturally, the investment itself is not the only activity. There is a lot of work and a whole pipeline of activities that must be done both upstream and downstream of the investment. These activities are usually encompassed within three major stages. The first is the sourcing of opportunities. When you raise a fund and you have money, where do you find the companies to actually invest in? But more than finding companies, finding good companies that can provide good opportunities for returns. Then comes the actual investment and intervention. Once you've found a possible opportunity, you need to do the financial engineering for the deal to structure the investment, but also do your due diligence on the company to make sure that the business case really is a winner. A lot of opportunities that seem good don't really pass the muster once you look at them more closely. And then, if everything checks out, the fund actually invests and intervenes in the company. And finally, monitoring is needed throughout the lifetime of the investment. Because even if the company has a master plan, nothing works out as expected. And most companies need to be on track and possibly readjust direction as time goes by. It's important to understand how private equity funds work and how these activities fit into its J-curve of returns, which we're going to take a look at in a minute. So private equity investments don't just exist in a vacuum. They exist within a fund. Every private equity firm raises a fund, or usually several if they're successful, each one with a specific amount of capital from investors and to produce returns by a target date. So for example, a fund can raise 10 billion from institutional investors to obtain returns in 5 years, which is also called the hold period for the investors, because they can't take the money out until that deadline is reached. So this means that within those 5 years, the private equity firm must find opportunities to invest those $10 billion in, and once the investor allocations are locked in, they have to start investing and making what are called the first capital calls, where the fund starts to draw down money from the investors as opportunities slowly appear, and then invest in those companies and return results, all within those 5 years. So all of these pipeline activities are on a schedule. Within those 5 years, all of these stages must happen, and successfully. In many cases, they're not even synchronized. So the private equity partner will have to deal with some companies being at the investing stage, leading due diligence and structuring the deals, while other companies may already be invested that need to be monitored, and maybe there are still opportunities coming into the pipeline that can be interesting for the future. Usually, these are synchronized, but they can happen at different stages. The J-curve represents the figure of the returns of a fund over time. Its name comes from its figure. It makes a J. So you start at the beginning, and then the returns dip a little bit within the first years, then they break even, and then they shoot upwards, making a J figure. So if a fund has a duration of 5 years, for example, it's fully expected that within the first 1 to 2 years, returns are going to be negative, because it's the investing phase. The fund is just pouring money, drawing down from investors, and getting nothing in return. This is the dip. By years 3 to 4, there is usually a break-even, as the first results start to appear. So you go from negative to 0. And by years 4 to 5, the returns just shoot up. This is called the harvesting phase. You're not investing any capital, so there's nothing negative, but all of the companies are returning results, and the value just goes upward. This J-curve is characteristic of many other different funds, like venture capital, and it's actually present in other areas of nature and business. For example, in the startup world, it's known as the hockey stick, and it represents the desired growth that a successful startup like Facebook or Uber is supposed to have, but that few actually have. So this type of pattern can be summarized as things will get a little bit worse before they get dramatically better. This is important to clarify why in private equity firms, these three activities, sourcing, investing, and monitoring, will sometimes be happening in parallel. Because from associates to partners, you may need to help companies that are in an existing fund that is probably maturing and near its end date, but also you may need to, at the same time, source deals for a new fund that is being raised. Or maybe most investments are maturing, but a new opportunity comes in that is so attractive that you have to invest at that stage. So private equity professionals usually perform these different tasks at these three stages. So for example, at the sourcing and vetting stage, the team may meet with intermediaries like investment bankers, but not only, to actually find the deals, review the possible deals, and maybe do the first round of due diligence to screen for good opportunities. Maybe meet the management team, maybe do an on-site visit, and so on. At the investing stage, when you found a good opportunity and you actually want to invest, the teams are usually involved with the financial engineering to make the deal work. So for example, selecting the financial instruments to underwrite the deal, the consideration, but also defining the value creation blueprint for the company, that master plan. Especially for leveraged buyouts, there is a very strict master plan to create value in the company within those 4 to 5 years that ruthlessly optimizes operational expenses to pay the interest on that every month, while at the same time restructuring the company and putting the right people in the right place with an emphasis on performance-based compensation. In this plan, in this financial engineering, has to be in place before an investment is even considered, much less actually consummated. And finally, even after investing, teams also have to take care of monitoring and optimizing an investment after it has been done. Maybe there's something in the market that affects the master plan. Maybe there's a new competitor. Whatever it is, there's going to be a little bit of tuning and tailoring to make sure that the company reaches its goals. There are also other tasks here that don't necessarily relate to one of the three phases of the investment process. For example, helping with reporting fund performance, both internally and to the LPs or limited partners, the actual investors, as well as other operations. And on top of this, it's important to realize, again, that different teams may be performing different activities for different funds as well. So if your first fund is near the end date and there's a new fund being raised, it's completely expected that you have to monitor and optimize the current investments from this fund that is winding down, while at the same time sourcing opportunities and maybe even already investing in companies for the new one. So as we see, it's important to understand these three phases because that's how a private equity fund usually works. And those three comprise the total lifetime of a fund, starting with sourcing, then investing, and then monitoring those investments.